Mr. Krishnamurthi, welcome to the show and thank you so much for sparing out the time.
Thank you so much, Mayank. It's a pleasure to interact with you, and I'm a big fan of Autocar because I've been reading this magazine for a long time, automobiles being my passion. So it's good to talk to you.
Right. Good to hear that. And I would first like to understand from you what exactly does Axiscades do, globally and in India, and what are the services that the company is offering if we talk specifically about, the automotive sector?
Sure. So Axiscades is a engineering services product development company, and we are present in the verticals of aerospace, heavy engineering, automotive, and energy. And we work with some of the leading companies in the world in each of these sectors. In aerospace, for example, we work with Airbus, and that's a relationship which goes back 12 years. And we just recently did a press release where we signed up a 5-year contract with them. A lot of work that we do with them in the aerostructures area, and also some of it in other areas which are relevant to them across France, Germany, and the UK. Similarly, in heavy engineering, we work with one of the biggest brands in the industry. Unfortunately, not at liberty to name the company, but again, it's a relationship which spans more than a decade. A lot of work on design, a lot of work on the digital front when it comes to digital work instructions, 3D printing, etc. Similarly, in automotive, we have a practice which works with some of the very popular OEMs, and we do a lot of work in the body structures area, body engineering, as well as some work in digital and in embedded systems. And again, energy is a focus area for us where we look at the renewables sector specifically. And with this whole climate change and the COP26 summit, which happened, there's a big push towards renewables. And that's an area that we are sort of focused on. And just going forward as a company, and I just recently joined the company, by the way, in November. So it's been just about 3.5 months. We are looking at how we can intensify our focus into these sectors, into heavy engineering, into aerospace, automotive, energy, as well as grow into the medical devices and high-tech communication sector. And our focus is to disproportionately grow our business and revenues when it comes to embedded software and when it comes to digital. And there's a lot of things which are happening in this industry which are sort of showing a lot of trends. There's Web 3.0, there's quantum computing, there's the Metaverse, and each of these has and deep tech, which has a lot of relevance to the engineering industry in specifically when we talk of these sectors. So this is our focus going forward.
Right. Mr. Krishnamurthi, you mentioned about embedded software, digital and metaverse. So from the automotive industry's perspective, can you share insights about how exactly are we going to see the relevance of these technologies going forward? Because, with COVID especially, we have seen a lot of disruption happening on the ground level. And a lot of things have moved online, people have been working remotely. So I believe software has already, shown how people can, continue to work despite disruptions coming in. So going forward, like you also mentioned that, the company is bullish about, embedded software. So how are we going to see these technologies shaping up when we talk about the automotive industry?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Mayank. So as you know, the computer is a car now. So I remember, I think 10 years back, I remember an advertisement from one of the major brands where they said 0 to 60 in 6 seconds or something like that. I think if you look at advertisements now, it's all about passenger experience. It's all about how connected the car is, and everything else that is, features which are enabled through embedded software. So the whole embedded software and digital has taken a very, very central role as far as automotives are concerned. And really, it started becoming a point of differentiation. And, as we know that, the whole cockpit, the vehicle electronics, infotainment, everything is so much advanced now, and there's so much integration that's happening with a lot of players in the industry. There's streaming services which are being brought in. And this is where embedded software has a central role to play, because there's a lot of sensors which are now embedded in the car, and all of these sort of provide various information, various functionality, your wiper control, your lane change, your sunroof, etc., as well as all the diagnostics that can be done on the fly. So OEMs actually have a lot of data that they can mine through these sensors, and that is something that they use to sort of differentiate and provide a superior customer experience. And again, through COVID, we have seen that a lot of car sales have happened online. So there's a lot of AR, VR that has happened, getting the customer closer to, as close to experiencing the car as possible in a virtual environment. And that's where, you can sort of look at deep tech and metaverse, where there's a lot of intense engineering that's happening from a technology perspective in specific sectors. And that is having the influence. And again, the whole augmented reality is playing a big role in terms of not just how you visualize the product, but also in terms of how you can customize it and how you can sort of experience it. And you can sort of also, bring in a lot of features, which otherwise, would have been hard to sort of portray to a customer unless you actually had a demo vehicle on the site. So this has actually had a big impact. And again, from a digital perspective, we are seeing that, it's the customers can actually think of automotive and their users in many different ways. And really, it's all that the mind can restrict you in terms of creativity. But there's a lot that's possible in terms of your interaction with the car, the uses that you can have for it, what you visualize for it, and the various business purposes that it can be put to.
Mr. Krishnamurti, this metaverse, I would say it's a buzzword right now, and maybe perhaps it's going to be the trend of 2022 and even further. So when exactly and from which segments in the Indian car market do we see the metaverse coming in? I mean, are these going to be the luxury players who are going to, deploy this technology to enhance their sales at the luxury, at the premium end of the segment? Or, companies who are in the mass market space, even they are going to, leverage metaverse and these digital retail technologies going forward?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think my personal view is that you would see the premium sector and the luxury sector, both of them sort of using augmented reality, using metaverse to sort of interact with the customer, because clearly that's where the differentiation comes in. And if you look at the premium sector and the luxury sector, really, it's not the price point which is the differentiator, but it is the features of the car, and it is how you can delight a customer which becomes important. Whereas obviously in the mass market, it's a very price conscious market, so customers are looking for very basic functionality. And obviously even there, as much as you can pack in is something that the customer would like, but really the feature selling and the various uses, and the visualization of a car and the product and the interiors and everything else comes with the premium and the luxury sector. So I think things like metaverse, augmented reality, virtual reality, that would be more relevant in those sectors.
And when exactly do we see these technologies becoming mainstream in these segments? We are slowly during the last 1.5 years, we've seen companies use these technologies to launch their new products. But when it comes to, selling these products and taking it to the end customer, so when do we see a realistic timeline? When exactly can we, see these technologies giving their actual output when it comes to, sales of these products?
I would say that it's hard to put a timeline in terms of years, but I would say that it's certainly near term. If you look at some of the developed markets, there's obviously a lot of more comfort, and the customer experiences various brands as well. So there is a bigger adoption of virtual reality and sort of engaging virtually with the product. In India, I would say that it is still in its it is developing very, very quickly. And the good thing with India is it's a market which is leapfrogging technology. So we necessarily will not go to the same paces that probably the Western world went through, but we will sort of leapfrog from one to the other. And there is a lot of comfort with technology. I think there's obviously infrastructure issues as well, which might sort of actually speed up this. And also things like 5G, things like high tech, adoption of those will enable you to sort of render your experience in a much, much more superior way. So I would say that, as 5G becomes more common, as, high-speed broadband and all that adoption increases, we will certainly see much more adoption, but it is certainly in the near term. Like I said, it's hard for me to say how many years, but it's not too far away. It will certainly happen very, very quickly.
And Mr. Krishnamurti, does it also enable, we've seen over the last, very, recent months, we've seen a couple of manufacturers in India adopt this direct to customer retail strategy. One is in the four-wheeler segment, one is in the two-wheeler segment. So does this technology also enable these players to then, leverage this D2C model going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you can directly engage. I think the traditional model, you'd go to a dealer, you'd look at a car, you'd do a test drive. And some of those things you would still do, but a lot of times the shortlisting that a customer would do in terms of which brand they want to go to, some of the comparison that they want to do, all of that can be done, virtually, because of the fact that you can obviously engage electronically, but also through some of these technologies you can visualize what the product looks like, and you get a better immersive kind of customer feel. So that way the engagement that the OEM has with the end customer is much, much more richer. And it's also a feedback mechanism, right? I think depending on how, and the questions that the customer asks and the kind of interaction that happens, it is a feedback loop to the OEM as well in terms of how they can enrich their product. So certainly, this is something which will definitely strengthen the link, I would say, between the OEM and the customer. But there is still a large percentage of sales which happens to the dealer, where customers actually want to do a test drive, and in most cases people will want to experience the car. And that can also be done obviously directly through the dealer to the consumer, but that requires scale. So I would say in the short term, it will still go via the dealer infrastructure, but it is certainly possible that going into the future, OEMs will be able to extend the whole selling experience directly to the customer.
Sure. Coming to the engineering side of the things, you mentioned that Axiscades is, offering you services in, the core engineering of these vehicles itself. So now, with this transformation or this transition towards electric mobility, how are things changing on that front? Are you like now required from your OEMs to design in a very different manner? You have to, research on different materials, maybe more lightweight materials going forward, which are the requirement of these vehicles. So if you can give a brief about, what sort of changes at the engineering front have come in.
Sure. So I think with electrification, there are two, three things which have come in. One is that clearly, like you said, there is a need to look at lightweighting. So you need to look at different composite materials because the battery itself is quite heavy. So you need to look at how you can optimize the car. And obviously, with carbon composites, etc., there is a lot of creativity that you can do. There's a lot of good form factor that can be provided. So clearly on the body engineering front, there is a lot of activity that will happen. And of course, with the battery chassis design, with range anxiety, etc., there are things that one will have to look at. And then there's a huge need for power electronics, because that is now something which is becoming more and more mainstream. And with the increased adoption of EV vehicles, you'll see that there will be more need for power electronic engineers, and that industry will become much, much more mature. So there is certainly a need for that to come in. The third thing I would say is that along with EV will be the whole connectivity will improve. And into the future, you will see, obviously, here and now, we see things around autonomy. We see all the features that a car provides. But, as you start seeing smart city infrastructures, you'll see that, the way the vehicle interfaces with, various infrastructures like street lamps, or with, battery swapping stations, or with other services, you will see that those services will be provided as a product, and that kind of interactions will become two-way. So it is quite possible that on the dashboard of a car, you'll be able to interact with, the next service station, place your orders. You can look at when you need to do a battery swap. You'll have a lot of intelligent sensor information that can be exchanged with the smart highway network. So you will see more and more need for, I would say, the interface between high-tech connectivity and embedded electronics, and the nature of services that could be provided and the kind of products that you'd have would be much, much richer down the line. And of course, this, like I said, is tied to the other infrastructure being developed. So one is, of course, what goes inside the car, but what happens outside the car in terms of the infrastructure also is very important. And it's just a matter of time before, that happens. And that will definitely lead to much richer environment.
And one more aspect to that is, like you mentioned, autonomy, this autonomous driving technology that, I mean, a lot of companies, a lot of, big players in around the world are kind of developing from such a long time now. So when do you see that making its way into Indian market? Because we've already seen, some companies offering level 2 ADAS perhaps right now, and which are like assistance features to the driver while, he's driving the car or while he's parking on the car. What exactly do you see, the trend in terms of the autonomous driving solutions for the Indian market? And from a company like yours, what exactly are the work which is that you're doing right now when it comes to autonomous technologies?
Sure. So I think the thing with autonomy is that a lot of technology is already there, and a lot of OEMs have actually invested, and a lot of the cars actually do have, like you said, level 2 autonomy, or even more. I think what obviously needs to be bottomed out is the regulations, and every country will have its own regulations in terms of when autonomy can become, when autonomy will be allowed and when it can be mass produced. And certain states in the US, in Europe, have started trialing autonomy. So really, the adoption of autonomy depends on the government regulation. But in terms of features, a lot of cars actually can drive on their own. And obviously, there's regulation where there needs to be a manual driver who needs to sit alongside just to make sure the car is going on the right track and all of that. And that's really coming down to comfort and the public adoption. But a lot of features are already there. From our perspective, I think autonomy needs a lot of AI. You need a lot of algorithms to be built in. There's a lot of data tagging, pattern recognition that needs to come in. So that's some of the work that we are doing. And some with these algorithms, the more data you provide them, the more it learns and more accurate it becomes. So the whole data infrastructure, the data science that goes behind it, is really the bedrock of AI and autonomy. Because if you have better data and if you have better learning algorithms, you have much more accuracy. So some of the work we are doing is around the whole data infrastructure, also around some of the AI and ML that goes behind the autonomy. And of course, within the car itself, the human machine interface, that is becoming quite sophisticated. Again, there is a lot of AI that's being built out there, which is within the vehicle. So that's also some of the work that we are doing with some of our customers.
So are you doing this work which is in an India specific fashion, or are you doing this like for overseas markets?
Right now, it is some pilot cases. It's mainly for the overseas market. We haven't started doing it for the Indian market, but I guess it's just a matter of time before it sort of evolves and we see more adoption in the Indian market as well.
But do you see the infrastructure challenges, posing a threat for the adoption of these technologies in India?
Well, I would say just if you look at EV and electrification, clearly the charging infrastructure is something that needs to be built up. If you look at some metros, there is a decent infrastructure, but the moment you get onto the highway, you will see that the charging infrastructure is still not there. Having said that, the government is sort of committed to investing and making sure that this is sort of built up, and India is also committed to its own climate control goals. So this is something that will certainly develop. And as you see more and more electrification, as you see more EVs, some of the next generation cars that will come in, the OEM that will come in, they will also bring in more AI and more autonomy features that come in. So, if you look at some of the cars that you can import, they already have it. But if you look at Indian automotives, if you look at what is sold in the Indian market, I think price point certainly is a challenge because of the pricing structure. It can become quite expensive. But then, as indigenous production ramps up and as adoption improves, it's a matter of economies of scale, and then you will definitely see more adoption of this.
Right. And one more thing related to autonomous is AutoSAR. So I believe Axiscades is very strong in this space, which is like the AutoSAR embedded software for autonomous driving. So you mentioned about these price points. So when it comes to locally developing these technologies, or supplying these solutions to the local players in India, the OEMs. So how is the company engaging on that level?
Yeah, so we work with both the OEMs as well as the tier ones, and a lot of the tier ones, as they have big captive centers in India. And actually, the trend in the market is that the tier ones are starting to rebrand themselves as software technology companies, surely because of the fact that the software stack is now becoming a bigger proportion of what they do versus some of the hardware stack. So the work that we do actually is across for the tier ones and the OEMs. And it's nowadays a little bit hard to distinguish as to what goes into a product in India versus what goes into a product overseas, because the supply chain is so integrated now that what we develop is a framework which actually can be adopted both in India as well as overseas. So when you work with the tier one, the tier one in turn works with various sets of customers. Some of them could be Indian, some of them could be global. So what we actually work with them can actually be cross national. So it's sometimes hard to sort of differentiate, if you know what I mean, in terms of saying this is purely for the India market versus something that sort of goes globally. But certainly we're seeing a lot of AutoSAR, a lot of embedded, a lot of software that's coming in, and the demand for that is skyrocketing to an extent that it's not it's supply which is sort of disrupting things. So if you can get more engineers, if you can get more competencies and more capabilities, then you can cater to the demand. And this, I think, is a universal problem across the industry, across the engineering services player, product development companies. I think everybody has this challenge.
You brought up a very relevant point, Mr. Krishnamurthy. So, what exactly is the situation right now when it comes to talent for these technologies? Are you leveraging or are you able to leverage the talent that is available in India, or there is a substantial shortfall that you see in terms of the skill level that is, needed for developing these technologies?
So there is a substantial shortfall. I think the demand when we talk to our customers is huge. In fact, we were talking to one of our customers just last week, and they want to ramp up anywhere between 5,000 to 10,000 engineers in a rapid scale. And the question that they ask us is, tell us how many people you have, and we'll sort of get all of them employed. So it's that kind of a situation. So we are predominantly looking at talent in the Indian market because a lot of our offshore delivery centers and the heart of our company are sort of beats out of India. So we are looking at a combination of in-house talent, hiring laterally, as well as running training programs so that we can sort of bring in junior folks, like graduate engineer trainees, train them in relevant skills and sort of place them into the market. So our focus area for talent, certainly the catchment area, is within India, and we see a lot of companies also doing the same thing. But it is a lot of cross skilling that's happening, a lot of training that's happening, but there is a big shortage, and I think this will continue maybe for the next 1 year to 18 months at least, until technologies mature and more automation and things like that come in.
Right. And is the global semiconductor shortage also creating a hindrance for a company like you?
I would say that it is certainly an issue for the OEMs because they're able to manufacture their cars, but without the semiconductors, a lot of the features are obviously not being able to all sort of fit together. So therefore, sales of cars have dropped because of that. But as far as we are concerned, a lot of the work that we do with our customers is more future focused into product development. So in a way, that doesn't really come in the way because often when we work on a product, whether it's in aerospace or heavy engineering or automotive, you have two types of work. One is future product development, which will hit the market in a year's time, 2 years time, 3 years time. So that no matter whether there's a semiconductor shortage or not, you still have R&D going in. You still have a lot of your design work and validation, manufacturing, engineering, all of that. So that certainly happens. But when it comes to supporting and looking at existing products, that's where the global industry economics and the macroeconomics, things like semiconductor shortage or the COVID situation that hit the aerospace industry, those kind of things come into play. So I would say a small part of our business is impacted by the semiconductor chip shortage, but a lot of the product development and design and engineering still continues. So that is not impacted to a large extent.
Final question, Mr. Krishnamurthy. I want to touch upon this aspect of manufacturing. Now, with all these modern products coming in, we are seeing, and like we talked about electric vehicles, there's a completely different engineering that is happening when it comes to these vehicles. So is the manufacturing also kind of changing substantially? And when we talk about that, so what is the kind of adoption rate of IoT solutions or maybe PLM, product lifecycle management technologies, are you seeing with respect to companies in India? How open are they right now? And is there a serious need to transform their entire manufacturing setups going forward when we talk about the disruptions that are coming in?
And absolutely, there is a lot of change that's happening in the manufacturing setup as well. So PLM is big. There's a big market for PLM, surely because there's a lot of product development that's happening. There's many more vendors, and the ecosystem is becoming much more richer. So there's PLM on the cloud by which you can sort of interact with your vendors, with your partners, and these kind of systems also help right from design to actually production. So there is a lot of adoption of PLM. I think that is big. Clearly the whole smart factory movement, AR, VR, that is changing the way manufacturing is happening. There is a lot more automation that comes in, whether it's cobots or robots. A lot of that is obviously coming in. So I think the need for sensors, the need for IoT, the need for data, digital twins, things like that are sort of gaining more and more ground. So we are definitely seeing a lot of change. And I think globally as well, we are seeing traditional OEMs as well as some of the EV startups adopting a lot of these manufacturing techniques so that they can become more efficient and they can get a product out sooner into the marketplace. So definitely a lot of change that's happening on that front.
Sure. Mr. Krishnamurthy, thank you so much for your time and for the lovely insights. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayank. Pleasure interacting with you.